a statistic that is deeply sobering. Sexual violence and conflict rose by 87% in also just 2 years. A reflection, I think, of wars increasing and the ways in which they are waged on the bodies of women and girls in shocking disregard, indeed, for international law. Behind these numbers are women giving birth in bomb shelters, girls being forced out of schools, survivors being silenced, and women peace builders risking their lives every single day to drive peace. Over the past 2 years, women and girls in Gaza have been killed at roughly 2 every hour, a number that should stop us all in our tracks. 58% of global maternal deaths take place in 29 crisis countries. And this is regrettably a figure point that is due to rise because of shrinking access to reproductive health care, because of, indeed, the wider backlash against women's rights across the world. These numbers really, when we unpack them, show us the cost of conflict. And so the next question for us as a global community is who gets to shape the peace and who is denied the power to do so. In Afghanistan, girls have been banned from attending school beyond 6th grade. Across Haiti, Myanmar, Sudan, and the Sahel, conflict and displacement have denied millions and millions more girls the right to learn. And across the world, what we see is that poverty continues to have disproportionately a female face. And nowhere is that truer than in conflict and crisis, where today, women are 7.7 times more likely to live in the most extreme forms of poverty in conflict and crisis settings than in stable settings. Further data on women's representation. Almost 9 out of 10 peace processes just last year included no women negotiators at all. I will repeat that. Almost 9 out of 10 peace processes had no women negotiators at all. Women made up just 7% of negotiators, 14% of mediators. And despite the most compelling and clear evidence that when women are actually at the table, peace is more durable, it is more sustainable, it is more inclusive. Exclusion at the peace table carries forward indeed to exclusion in governance, shaping who holds power actually long after conflict ends. And so what we see is that in conflict-affected countries, women hold just 18% of seats in local governance, in local councils. This is a figure that is actually nearly half of the global average, again, making us pause. The Secretary General's report tells us not only about representation, but it also tells us about resourcing. Funding cuts are weakening our collective capacity to deliver on gender equality, to deliver on peace. And we see this pattern right across the system. Our Deputy Executive Director in Nyaradzayi has just highlighted the impacts on the UN Peacebuilding Fund. But also as peacekeeping missions withdraw, what we see is that security vacuums grow, that violations actually go unmonitored, and women lose access. They lose access to justice, they also lose access to protection. Women-led networks that reduce community violence are, in fact, left without support. And we do see that the zeroing out of investment into women-led organizations was already a fraction of a fraction. What I mean by that is that only 0.4% of aid to conflict-affected countries actually reaches women's organizations. And these, of course, are the very organizations at the front lines who are equipped to prevent violence, who are there to build peace. And so even that cut reverberates widely. Nearly half of women's organizations we surveyed as UN Women in crisis contexts expected to close within just 6 months. These funding cuts deepen the very same inequalities the Women, Peace and Security agenda was actually created to resolve and to solve. If current trends continue, we actually risk erasing 2 decades of progress on women's rights in conflict settings. The report is very clear on what can be done. And so as I close, let me just reemphasize that the report calls us, all of us, governments, the UN system, every actor in peace and security to act with urgency, to do a number of things I'll highlight 4. Number 1, to set binding targets and quotas to ensure women's full, equal, and safe participation in peace and political processes. This also includes committing at least 1% of bilateral donor aid and development assistance directly to women's organizations in conflict-affected crises. Number 2, to ensure accountability for all acts of gender-based persecution, reproductive violence, and conflict-related sexual violence. Number 3, to redirect resources away from arms and towards peace building and towards women-led recovery. And finally, to lead a data revolution. I think we already heard from the Secretary General spokesperson that today is World Statistics Day. And so it is only, I think, apt that we are calling for a gender data revolution so that women's experiences in crises are counted, that they are visible, and that they are taken into account. I think we know and see that the evidence is very clear. When women lead, when their organizations are resourced, peace is more possible. Actually, recovery is faster, it is more durable, and societies are stronger. In essence, when women lead, peace follows. 25 years now, following Security Council Resolution 1325, we know what works. The question now is whether we will act on what we already know. With this, thank you so much.
Thanks very much. I'll now open the floor up for our questions.
Abdullah with Ruda Media Network from Kurdistan, Iraq. 2 questions. What do you think are the reasons for this lack of progress or setback in some contexts for women's role or participation, in conflict resolution? And secondly, does the report look at the world country by country? If yes, can you tell us what it says about Iraq? Has there been any progress or setback in Iraq and the Kurdistan region? Thank you.
Thank you. I can.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
The barriers to participation, and then my colleague will speak to the methodology for the Secretary General's report. It's not a single reason. It's multiple reasons why women are not often on the peace table. And as the report also provides, and has been said over the years, the first is that women are not as yet fully in the decision-making structures of governance, ordinary governance in many of our countries, and much more so in the security sector. So that is the first barrier. That's why SDG 5 is very important, which speaks for women's representation and gender parities in all sectors, at all levels, in all institutions. The second is protection. I was involved in some of the peace talks when we were responding to some of the crisis situations. When people go to the negotiating tables, most of the people at the table have protection. Women who stand up to be on the front line to show their face might not have the necessary protection that they need when they go back home. So the issue of protection of peace builders, women human rights defenders, is so important because the insecurity that is also attendant to participation is important. This is the work that we do on human rights, women human rights defenders, peace builders, and mediators. And the third is resources. We do not have enough funding that is prioritizing participation of women on the peace table. The prioritization of resources. So yes, 1325 says participate, but the funding for it needs to be accompanied by the funding that enables women to participate. Thank you, and my colleague will speak to the methodology of the Secretary General's report.
Yeah, thank you so much for your questions. And indeed, in terms of the Secretary General's report, and acknowledging that there are right now 61 active armed conflicts, and as I mentioned, 676 women living in close proximity to conflict and affected by that. Consequently, the report is not intended to be a comprehensive rendering of every single conflict around the world. What the report does is describe global trends, and some of them are illustrated by specific data points with representative examples, and so draws out those global trends with stark examples to bring that data to life. Certainly as UN Women, we do try to speak out on many of the major conflicts affecting women and girls in a distinct and specific way, whether through public statements or through gender alerts, or when our executive director is indeed invited to brief at the Security Council and those relevant meetings. On your first question, and just to complement our Deputy Executive Director's points, I think here, in addition to the very three salient points she made, it is imperative to see that over these last 25 years, governments in the UN have made very ambitious commitments to women, peace, and security. But the implementation itself has actually been weak and underfunded. And so we also need to take hold of the drastic aid cuts that have left many women's organizations in conflict zones facing significant constraints and in fact imminent closure. We do know that that overall excluding half the population from peace processes actually leads to fragile agreements and to ones that rarely last. And so it is imperative, if peace is actually to be representative of all, then all need to be at the peace table itself. Thanks.
Zina from Free Yemen I want to ask, besides issuing reports and accusing and going out to speak, what the UN use as tools, or let's say weapons, to hold the government, authoritarian governments, accountable for what they are doing to the women, and what did they fix so far? I'm not talking just about the places who are in wars or something like this unrests. It's all over the world. I feel or I believe the women, they have no rights, even in pay rise or something like that. They have no rights. They have no equal rights as men. Thank you.
The true essence of the decision when the UN was established was equality and non-discrimination in the context of peace and security, human rights and development, that Article 55 of the UN Charter. So rights exist as a matter of international law. The point that we agree with you is that it's whether those rights are protected, are accessed, are enjoyed. And women in many countries and many communities are not, including in context of conflict. And this is why the focus of the work that we do, the mandate that we also have as UN Women, and the recent, just last month, was a very strong commitment by member states to say we must step up to ensure that there is investment in empowerment, in rights, and in participation of women. So definitely more work to be done. Progress has been made, but insufficient. But the situation of conflict and crisis makes the situation even much more complex.
Farnoosh?
Thank you. Farnoosh Amiri with the Associated Press. I just wanted to ask, specifically, you mentioned this isn't a comprehensive report, but can you give examples of countries that are doing well and are reaching goals, and what you've learned about what the differences are and how they're able to do that, and what lessons can be learned from that? And then secondly, you mentioned that a lot of the goals that member states and the UN Women in general made were ambitious. Given the funding situation with the UN as a whole, is it better to do a few things really well instead of trying to do many things at the same time?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for your really thoughtful question. And indeed, I think we have seen that commitments to women's participation in peace processes have demonstrated some exemplars of commitment to advance results. There are now 113 countries around the world with national action plans on women, peace, and security. 55% of those actually include explicit commitments on women's participation in peace processes. This is good news. Furthermore, 42% of them set out a dedicated commitment to support women mediators. We also see that this commitment to advance women's full, equal, and meaningful participation is actually now firmly integrated into multiple Security Council resolutions. Outcomes adopted by other intergovernmental bodies, such as the UN General Assembly and the Pact for the Future, actually name this very explicitly. And regional policies also on women, peace, and security have gone forward. And so we do see that there is, in principle, in words, a lot of dedicated commitment to realize change. We also see positive developments on how that is translating to examples of progress concretely. And the report names some of those. I'll give you just a few examples. For example, the repeal of discriminatory legislation hindering women's participation, such as property ownership as a requirement for candidates, was undertaken just recently in the Central African Republic. The 30% quota for women being enshrined in the Somali electoral laws were amended just at the end of last year. And furthermore, the appointment of 4 women to the Provisional Electoral Council in Haiti, and an increase also of the quota for the percentage of women in the draft constitution of Haiti went from 30 to 40%. So the report gives very clear and strong exemplars of that. The report is also a look back over 25 years. It is, in fact, this 25-year commemoration. And it looks over these 25 years, and as it does so, it mentions what women from Colombia, what women from the Philippines, what women from Liberia actually did for peace in their countries, how that transformed not just the status of peace, but the durability of peace. And it also shows, I think, how their countries are much better for the strong role of women and their service in the service of peace. Thank you.
Should we narrow or broaden? I think a couple of reflections on that, which is very clear in the report. Women's lives are total lives in conflict situations. Women don't live today, we are living our health life. Tomorrow we are living our water and sanitation life. Tomorrow, it's complete. It's a completeness. So the importance of complete peace is important. The importance of peace, humanitarian recovery, access to services, and the voice of women and girls in their communities is so important. Because if we start to go thematic, we then miss women in crisis, at times struggle and face greater risk when they are simply going to fetch water, when they are simply trying to help their kids be in some form of education or get some form of education. So as UN Women, we are also clear in the Secretary General's report that we need the whole of the system to implement 1325, recognizing the role that we have as UN Women. We are also very clear as the lead agency on women around the importance of the normative work, standard setting, the importance of coordination within the UN system, and the criticality of impact. That it's about lives in countries, it's about systems, and it's about our member states really implementing 1325. So a very comprehensive and holistic approach is needed, and at the same time, the focus must be on ensuring effectiveness and reduction of duplications, but at the same time ensuring that we treat women not as a theme but in the totality of the life they exist within their communities.
Prosper?
Thank you so much. I come from Democratic Republic of Congo, especially from the Eastern DRC. I have two specific questions. Peace initiatives are ongoing to try to put an end to the conflict in Eastern DRC that has lasted for around 3 decades. But women organizations in my country, especially in Eastern DRC, are saying that they are left behind in all processes that aim to bring about a lasting peace in Eastern DRC. They say that Washington process and Doha process do not involve them in the process of bringing peace in Eastern DRC, taking in consideration the fact that women carry a heavy burden of conflict. What do you say about that?
The essence of the Secretary General's report is exactly the point that you are raising, that women share their heart out, describing the atrocities, describing the exclusion. And when we are on the peace tables, when it comes to humanitarian discussion, the table is a little bit open. There is a wider invitation for people to be in the discussions. When the agenda item is now on power sharing, the door closes for women a little bit more. Women are less involved on the political discussions. When it comes to wealth sharing, sessions of peace negotiations, at times the door literally closes for women. So Resolution 1325 is saying women's participation is not necessarily just describing the situation. The Secretary General's report is saying we actually need the mediation processes to open the doors for women to sit on the table when we are discussing the issues of climate issues, natural resources in Eastern DRC, security issues. These are the peace and security issues which we want women to also be actually on the table. So we totally agree with your perspective that we need to see more women. This is what the report is saying, that greater participation, my highest respect for the women in the DRC, including in the Eastern DRC, who against all odds and with very little funding, we've been to the Kivus and others, are trying to lift their country together, but are not fully included. We are pleased, at least, that from the AU perspective, there are 2 women, very senior women, who have been appointed to be part of supporting the process from the African Union. So also having women in the mediation is as important as women in the participation of the processes. But thank you for that question.
And a second question, overall, how you as UN, you evaluate the participation of women in political processes in Africa, especially in DRC? How do you evaluate in terms of figures and so on?
As the UN, we support and work with the African institutions, including the African Union, and we support the Office of the African Union Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security. So that is, and there is an annual report that the AU presents to the African Union institutions. That in itself is the space for the monitoring, and us as the United Nations, we support the African Union. We also work closely with the East African community and with the Southern African Development Community, because DRC belongs to both the East African community and also to SADC. So the UN supports the work on monitoring of through the intergovernmental bodies, but we also have a presence in the country. So as the UN system, our work through the UN country teams and the mandates that exist in the country are also our premise for monitoring what is happening and being able to provide guidance, support, but also advice.
Lenka?
Thank you very much for this briefing. Lenka White from RIA Novosti. Please, I was curious, how much has your department been impacted following the US reduction in foreign aid? And how do you address the United States concerns which are criticizing the department for pushing gender ideology? Are you in touch with them, or are you waiting what will come out of it? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. For UN Women, funding cuts have overall have resulted in a budget reduction of approximately 15% in the year 2024. I think in terms of impact, these reduced funds directly limit our life-saving services as well as our program reach. We are, however, incredibly grateful for the many governments and also the commitment of taxpayers over the years, and look forward actually to increasing collaboration with member states across the board. And certainly to fulfill our mandate, we do need sufficient resources to do so, to reach the women and girls that we serve. In terms of your question on gender ideology, UN Women in our founding resolution has been given a mandate by all member states to advance gender equality, women's rights, and their empowerment through a triple mandate of normative advancements, of UN system coordination, and of operational response. We do not see gender as an ideology. We see it as a human right, as a development imperative, and as a foundation of peace. Thank you so much.
Ephraim?
Thank you so much, Farha. My name is Ephraim Kosaifi with the Arab News Daily. I have a bit of a follow-up to the question that Prosper asked, the first question. We often hear about all this talk about women advancement will not really mean much unless it trickles down to the most vulnerable women, whether they're living in conflict situation or poverty or whatever. How would you describe because you use here the word woman as a homogeneous term, like encompassing term of all women. How would you describe the connection between the situation of women in developed nations, women who have already made advances, and those in conflict situation, whether Gaza or Congo or Iraq? Is there any intricate connectedness between them two, and is there awareness of that? And also when women have gains in one particular place, does that ever translate into advancement for women in less fortunate places? Thank you.
And thank you for that great question. We recognize that women, peace and security is for all women, all children, all members of the community. And it's very important in our work as we also understand that the situation of women who are displaced and in refugee camps is very different from the situation of a woman in the same country who is in the city. The situation of a widow who has lost the partner, the husband, and has lost the property is very different from the situation that might be there of a woman who is providing services and is a teacher and is also at risk or is a nurse. So when we talk about women, peace and security, we are also very conscious of an intentional understanding of the implications and the impact that war has on different circumstances of women. It cannot be a linear, singular narrative. It's a narrative that fully understands the context within which women live their lives. So the Women, Peace and Security agenda is also seeking to really understand those diversities. The women who are living next to the mines or in the farms with different circumstances. So that is an approach that we take as a UN in understanding the fullness of context. Yes, there's a lot of lessons learned. The global network of focal points on women, peace and security of many member states coming together is an example in which there are lessons learned from one country, one region to another country and another region. So this is the substantive work that as UN Women we also do, is to continue to draw on the best practices of the United Nations, of the member states, for us to learn from each other, to understand that land rights in Latin America and land rights issues in Southern Africa, how do we draw on the experiences? Because that collective learning is what is at the essence of multilateralism. And the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in 1325 resolution is also about a multilateral global standard setting within which we draw from the various experiences to build on an expectation that is there at the global level.
And just to add a few points to your incredibly thoughtful question. Number one, what we see is that the status of women and girls around the world is facing significant headwinds in terms of the regression of rights, in terms of backlash on gender equality. Recalling that 1 in 4 governments have identified backlash and regression to be a significant impediment to advancing gains for women and girls in their context. We see that there are a lot of interrelationships between women living in the context of conflict and women living in more developing contexts and developed. The face of poverty continues to bear a disproportionately female face, as you heard me say. 151 million women and girls are likely to be pushed into the most extreme forms of poverty by the year 2030. That's data from UN Women and UNDES's latest SDG snapshot report. But what we do see is that in conflict, those women are 7.7 times more likely to experience poverty. And so we see conflict almost as a magnifying glass for the egregious rights violations that women across contexts are facing. We also know, sir, that rising militarization is not making the world safer for women and girls. And even as governments make choices to increase military spend across the world, that in fact is diverting necessary resources away from prevention, from protection, and from peace building itself. A very important data point is that global military expenditure right now is now $2 trillion higher than it was 25 years ago when Security Council Resolution 1325 was agreed to by all member states. It is now sitting at 2.7 trillion just this year. And that is 9 times the amount needed to provide universal social protection for women and girls in the poorest countries of the world, including both developing as well as countries in conflict and crisis. This should bring us pause, and indeed, that is why the heart of the WPS agenda is not about making war safer for women and girls. It is, in fact, about ending wars once and for all.
Okay, Stefano, last question.
Thank you very much, Stefano Baccara, Ital Press Agency, La Voce di New York. First of all, I want to thank you for the assertive way you deliver your report, because many times very important data is delivered here, but the way is reported, you know, we need also this. We need this assertiveness. And my question is, in your you talked about solutions, that you propose solutions. Did you include that to prevent in the future conflicts, or at least to try to prevent more, the next Secretary General of the United Nations should be a woman?
Thank you for that great question. The UN Commission on the Status of Women, its 69th session, made a recommendation as part of its resolutions to say, can there be a consideration for a female Secretary General? And equally, the ECOSOC resolution of June also spoke to this issue. The commitment that member states have made is gender parity. The gender parity principle is very important for women and men to have equal opportunities to be in decision making at all levels and in all sectors. That is the essence of SDG 5. And gender parity report is, the Secretary General presents the gender parity report annually to the UN General Assembly. Actually, we're presenting the report only a few last week. So the gender parity report of the Secretary General is showing that we still have not had a female Secretary General. That's the fact in the report. So we continue to look up to the member states. It's a member states decision, but the principles still exist where the member states have set the principles on parity. Thank you.
I can just,
yes, please.
Yeah. Just to add, indeed, as Deputy Executive Director Nyaradzayi has highlighted, choosing the next SG, it's a decision for member states. But certainly for UN Women, we advocate fiercely for equal participation and leadership of women at every level. We believe, and we've seen this around the world, when women lead, peace follows. When women lead, economies thrive. When women lead, in fact, human rights are protected. And so we believe that the same should be true here at the United Nations. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. I'd like once more to thank our guests, Nyaradzayi Gumbonzvanda and Sarah Hendriks from UN Women. And thank you so much for your briefing.
Thank you very much.
Good day.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.